Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Perrodin on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Hi, everyone. This is David, and welcome to Safety Doc Podcast number 52. Rhetoric wins as school trip to D.C. canceled over fears of mass shooting. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. First off, behind me, for those of you watching this show via YouTube, the new signage has arrived, and you can see the Safety Doc. That's actually done in kind of a street sign format on metal. That turned out really well. Actually ordered all three of these signs from Walmart, and the total price was under $90 for all three. So I thought it was really good. These are well made. So if you're looking for signage, background signage, especially if you're doing podcasts, check out Walmart. I had to go online, and then you can upload your graphics and do that kind of stuff. But these really turned out well, and I've done previous signs through Walmart and I've had good luck. So I will be rearranging the background in the next couple days. So by the time we get to the next podcast, it's going to look different. You're not going to see the dumbbell set back there anymore. Obviously, you can kind of understand why it's not easy to move that, considering, there's a few 100 pounds of weights on that. Then I have to move down the credenza and kind of rearrange that room a little bit. I'm going to move the weights closer to the fireplace, which is not exactly what I want to do, but it's probably the only option I really have down here. So, but anyway, yeah, we're going to see more of kind of just books in the background. And then the signage is going to be reconfigured so it's more visible as I'm presenting. So right now it's just kind of setting up there. But we do have Sprigeo, S-P-R-I-G-E-O, Sprigeo.com. Be safe, Sprigeo, out of Santa Barbara, California. The nation's leader in online safety reporting, having to do with schools and bullying, threats made in schools. So the leader, Sprigeo, S-P-R-I-G-E-O, the exclusive sponsor here of the Safety Doc Podcast. I also do produce a monthly release for the Sprigeo customers that specifically deals with professional development in safety. So I'm glad to be doing that. An excellent company, an excellent CEO, and Joe Bruzet. So Sprigeo.com. If it's not in your kid's school, hey, parents, it should be, because it's really a terrific system that is evolving rapidly. You can tell over on the left, we have the old Safety Doc sign. So when you're watching the show on YouTube, I don't have to keep flashing the graphic up. This is the Safety Doc Podcast. And then also in a much larger format than previous, we have the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California, who now has been airing the Safety Doc Podcast at 2 p.m. PST daily for about a year. And it is the League of Extraordinary Podcasters. You can go in there and listen right after I'm done at 2 o'clock. Aaron Clary and the Clary Podcast comes on at 3. And on the weekends, Readily Random with Larry Roberts. I also recommend, it's not part of the 405 Media, but hey, check out Awareness Podcast. You can just go in, awarennesspodcast.com. Hector Solis, incredible journalistic professionalism and depth of work. And this is what he does on the side, just as a passion. But he has done recent shows on bullying, sex trafficking, and was a part and continues to be a part of Typical Daddy podcast. But can't say enough about the work of Hector. Anything Hector puts out there, I'm like, bing, instant download, something I want to listen to, just because the quality of the research, how the podcast is assembled, and then the audio quality is just so good. And I really appreciate that. So Hector, thank you for all of the work that you do in bringing awareness to everybody. And also the Sustainable Living Podcast with Marianne West. The Sustainable Living Podcast gets more into just how to live life more, I would say, minimalistic and simplistic. I love the episodes. I love the guests. She had on recently a guest of a tiny house movement. I thought that was fascinating. Marianne talked about her own difficulties when she was updating her home and just trying to find flooring that didn't have all these chemicals infused in it. And she's really genuine, really a great storyteller, has terrific guests, and it varies so much. There was an episode of a man who lived with his family in a hotel room, and they were cooking bologna or something. I mean, they were really down on their luck. I mean, this is all they had left. And he decided he was going to try to do something to augment that meal. And he found a onion patch toward the end of the hotel. So he took some onions and put them in. And then just how he kind of just turned that all into a business model of asking people if they could plant, flower and food gardens on their lawn, and then they would maintain those as long as they could obtain part of the harvest from that, and then they would give part of the harvest to the owner. And just it's just a tremendous podcast, but so much, and she'll go back, and I think Janice Fries does it with her, and they'll ground themselves every once in a while. I think it's something we all need to hear, because we get so busy in life, and it's a really great podcast. It's delivered at a very comfortable pace, very engaging, and it's different than what I listen to. Readily Random will bring you the phenomenal interviews. I'm like, how did Larry get these guests? It's incredible. And Larry is a true professional. Aaron Clary is going to be no nonsense and really get down to the economics of life and pulling away any rhetoric of what's really happening in society, and say, here's what's happening, here's how you need to respond to it. And just his own personal stories. I've listened to all of his podcasts. I really appreciate Aaron. I think Aaron's really a terrific guy too. I really value. He's captaincapitalism.blogspot.com. So please check him out. So we have a primary sponsor for the show, Sprigio.com. You can see the big sign in the back. Again, it's going to be rearranged so you can see it better. And for those of you listening, you're like, this isn't helping Dave. Okay, Sprigio, SPRIGEO.com. And then the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, California. So a few things here once we get into kind of the anecdotes of the story. I had a nice Thanksgiving. We actually stayed home with family, meaning my wife and my two daughters, which was the first time in a long time. We usually go to my wife's mother, or my wife's mother's place for Thanksgiving. Didn't do that this year, but it was nice to just kind of sit at home and check out what was going on TV. The Macy's Day Parade and things like that, and it was just nice. And Friday, the 24th of November, it was like 66 degrees here in southern Wisconsin. 66. So normally I'm putting Christmas lights out and my fingers are freezing and they're like just cracking and bleeding and then you work with extension cords, and once the extension cords get cold, like they do not bend. So it was a perfect day to go out and put out all the outside decorations, even to the point where I have a 150-foot long red rope light, which is a beast to wrap around a tree. You'd think it's easy, but it's not, because you kind of have to carry like the rope light as you circle around the tree, and then of course as you do it more and more and more, there's less rope light. It gets easier, but and then I use little twist ties to make sure everything stays in place, because we get blizzards once in a while, and I don't want everything lying on the ground. But it turned out really cool. It's kind of a cool effect. And one of my neighbors came over and he's like, hey, I'm really looking forward to the red lights going up. I'm like, oh, dude, I'm not sure I'm going to do that this year, but I did. So looking forward to that. Not sure how long I'll be putting those up, because I don't want to get too high on the ladder. I had a friend, he was a principal years ago that I worked with fell off a ladder doing some housework. I don't know, it was gutters or it was Christmas lights or whatever, but was paralyzed from the neck down. And he eventually died, like about 10 years later. He was doing some motivational speaking and stuff. But so like I'm like, hey, I'm only going to go so high where I feel comfortable, and that's it. So, but we made it work, and it looks pretty cool outside. So one thing I would recommend to you, if you were thinking about buying like rope lights, do not go with the 150-foot option. Go with like a 50-foot. I think you can connect them, like if you really want to, but it was just too hard to manage, especially if you're swirling it around a tree. But like I said, it's a really cool effect. It's the only kind of look like that in our neighborhood. Last year when I put these up, it literally was hours before a blizzard hit our community. So I got the last part of the lights up, and one of the neighbors was like walking by, and he's like, hey, great timing, because like literally an hour from now, like the storm hit, like that's how close it was. So I got them up, and things were okay, but it was just so nice. Literally, I was in shirt sleeves. I had a t-shirt on, and I felt warm. It was a warm breeze, and wow, it was just a phenomenal day. So rare in Wisconsin, like just so rare, because usually, and I pulled up the steel deer, which we've had for like 20 years. And these things are heavy duty, so you get your exercise lifting them up. And the lights die over time, and they have white lights on white deer, so then you just like rope new ones on top of the dead ones. So now they have like 8 layers of lights on them, and you can't tell when they're lit up at night, but during the day it's like, what's the deal? So eventually, like, I've got to disconnect all these lights and take them off, or like just cut all these things off and kind of start over again. But that's when they made these things. I mean, these things are made industrial tough. Now the motors don't all work, like the heads don't move up and down and things like that, but it's okay. Like the effect still looks really good. So I'm pretty excited about that. They turned out pretty well. And then I was able to spike them down. I got like these heavy duty spikes for like tent spikes, but they're not plastic. They're steel. And in past, I would try to spike these things down, but it would be like frozen turf. So you'd like bend the spikes and all of that. But like now, it's just so smooth to put them down and just to put everything out. I'm like, this is just awesome. Like, it was so good to put everything out yesterday. And then today it cooled down. We went and my daughters and I saw the movie Coco, which, I guess it's okay. Like, it's a movie I'd watch once and never would watch again. I didn't quite get the whole gist of Coco. So not really for me, but, I did get nachos with jalapenos out of the deal, so that did work out okay. A few things here. Just some bizarre anecdotes, but bizarre anecdotes are best heard after a short break here from the Safety Doc podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc podcast.
And welcome back. Hey, first of all, we had a record number of downloads for the Equifax Breach podcast. A big thanks out to Aaron Clary for giving a shout out on his blog, captaincapitalism.blogspot.com, for making that happen. And certainly a high interest topic. I think it's one of my better podcasts, so please go in and check it out. It is podcast 51. So, but yeah, it's amazing because between that and Yahoo and some of the other sources, it was by far the most downloads and views I've ever had of a show. So thank you very much. Anecdotes. One is, I don't know if you remember the 1970s TV show Emergency. So I'm watching. I loved Emergency. By the way, there was an Emergency marathon when I was in college, and this was, this was back in the 90s. But they showed like all weekend, all the episodes. And I think there were 6 years that it ran. And I watched like every episode. And actually, like after a while, it's like, oh, like I wasn't into that. But I really loved the show. And they had Roy DeSoto and John Gage. So Roy was a little bit older, and John was younger. And anyway, in one of the episodes I'm watching, and Roy says, yeah, my birthday is November 7th. And I'm like, Roy, that's my birthday. I never knew it. So I was kind of like, hey, the birthday, but like the actor Roy, like not his real birthday, but in the series. So I just thought that's kind of a cool thing. I did get contacted by Danny Woodburn. Many of you are going to remember Danny from his appearance as Mickey Abbott in Seinfeld. Mickey was kind of had met Kramer, or Kramer had met Mickey during acting class, and Mickey had his 7 episodes were all hilarious. It's too bad he didn't have more opportunities, because those were awesome episodes. I remember one before Christmas where Mickey was, I believe, an elf, and Kramer was Santa, and Kramer was on some anti-communism kick, and then Mickey's like, Kramer, or he's like, Santa is not a commie or whatever, but Mickey just so much. And I remember, in other movies, other works, but I want to really bring about that Danny Woodburn has done so much in inclusion and disability awareness and opening doors for people with disabilities, to the performing arts, to acting. And he has my utmost respect. So thank you, Danny. Danny and I have been in contact, and he is going to be a guest on my show after Christmas. So I am so thankful for that. And I have a number of questions kind of set up for Danny, and I'll work through those ahead of time. But I really want to learn more about how he got into the business, and also the actors he saw who could have made it, but because of maybe a disability or something like that, at the time, just didn't get the break. And also learn more about what Mickey's doing now, because he's made kind of a shift from being, an actor into an actor/advocate, and what that's really like. And does he see himself become, more in the advocate role or not? Because the thing is, like, I wonder, does it favor him to use the persona of Mickey Abbott and just some of his acting things to advance the agenda, which I'm not saying is right or wrong. I'm just wondering, or does he move from that and base it upon the professional work he's done in evolving opportunities for people with disabilities, because that is a very strong resume in of itself. So, but a big thank you out to Danny Woodburn. And I look forward to having Danny on the show. And Danny, I have loved your work, and yeah, so you're a phenomenal person. I greatly appreciate it. He was a presenter at Inclusion 2017, a conference in Boston just recently. Sean Iams Fuller, a comedian and voiceover and just so much more. Sean is going to be on the show. We're going to work that out. It's funny because Larry Roberts and I did a show where we talked about Sean. Sean had been on Larry's show, and we couldn't remember some of the works that Sean had done, so we had to punt on a few of those. And just one of those funny things, because Sean is phenomenal. Sean is great, but when you're doing live recording, sometimes things can slip by you. So Sean is going to be on the show. We're going to be doing it Skype video, and we can tell that story more when it gets closer. But I'm very fortunate to have Sean Iams Fuller. He is a tremendous comedian on the show. That's going to be funny, folks. That is going to be a good time. I think I can keep my own with most comedians. I guess we'll see with Sean. I'm a big fan of his work, though, so I'm very, very fortunate for that. I have an interview that will be with Justin Dooley. Justin, we're going to talk about, Justin is a friend of mine. And very interesting story, because he came upon an accident scene about a year ago with his wife on his way to a wedding. And so he's all done in his tuxedo and everything. And he talks about approaching this accident scene, which was a motorcycle driver who had been in an accident. And actually the motorcycle driver was lucid. So Justin happens upon this scene and then his reaction to that. And I think there's a lot to be discussed. And Justin and I have had some of these discussions already. He's going to be a lot of fun too. But, like he said, I'm here in my tuxedo and like I have a wedding to go to and there's other people there. So like you kind of got to weigh these things of like, what you help out with, what you don't help out with. And then, there are certain times too when you have to weigh, like, do you stop and do you help? Because for example, I drive right now, the interstate to work, and the interstate is completely under, there's work being done on the interstate. So there's like virtually no place to pull off, and the traffic patterns are changing all the time. So there's no place to pull off if there is an accident. Like if you pull over, there's a likelihood you could be rear-ended by someone doing 75 miles an hour. So it's one of those things too of like, how do you gauge your own safety in these situations? And I think that has to be a consideration. And one of the things I asked Justin too is, like, if you had something different that you could have had in your vehicle at the time that you pulled over to render assistance, what would it be? So we're going to talk about some of these things and some of the things that have to go through your mind and just preservation of your own safety, especially like right now when I drive the interstate. Honestly, I don't know what I would do in some of these circumstances. It's not that you don't want to stop and give aid, but the fact that you would stop and try to give aid probably puts yourself at extreme risk to be harmed. So, do you drive beyond that and then report where that location was? And I don't know, but we're going to have a great interview coming up with Justin Dooley. Hey, and that is going to be the first time we are going to be using my Canon camcorder. Remember we had Bree Hansen on for an interview, Dave Hyde, but this time I just ordered the H4n Pro out of made by Zoom. And I was I logged into my Amazon account yesterday, and all of a sudden it popped up underneath, and it's like, hey, right now if you call Amazon at this number, we will issue you a special discount for this recorder, which had been in my inbox or my save box for a while. So I called, and a really nice gentleman to work with, and he knew the equipment. Like he's like, yeah, I've used this. I don't personally own it, but I don't own it, but I've used it like in a band, and I put it up, and it's able to really record bass well, and that's pretty hard. So I'm like, wow, like this guy actually knows like all the stuff about it. Really nice guy. And he's like, I'm authorized to give you this percentage discount right now on this. So here's the code, go in and like type it and whatever. And I got a pretty substantial amount off this, literally to the point where these things sell so high on eBay that it doesn't make sense to not just buy it new. Because when you buy on eBay, you don't know if somebody has dropped this thing. Most of the times, you're going to run into good luck, but you don't know if somebody's dropped these things or what the deal might be. So I'm like, for the difference in this, it literally was about $30 more than what they were selling for once they get bid up on eBay. So I'm like, I'm looking forward to that, and then I'll order the accessories for it. But I can plug it in to my camcorder, and then I can set it up on a little tripod right in front of Justin and I. So when we do this recording, we're going to have some really phenomenal audio. I also recorded or ordered a lapel mic. So when I do some of my, I don't know so much of these shows, but when I do fireside chats for the college courses I teach, I like to do those in different settings. Like sometimes upstairs, like out on my porch in summer, if it's really nice. And the problem with that always was you got a little bit of wind that would interfere with the camcorder, plus the camcorder audio wasn't that good. So this is going to take care of those problems. And it's going to just allow me to do better field interviews. So I'm really looking forward to getting my Zoom 4 H4n. And like I said, right now I have a Sony handheld recorder, which has worked well. It worked well through my dissertation, but it only records in mono, and it's pretty basic, So this is really going to take things up a step. And also down here in the studio, I think I'm going to take the camcorder, take an angle shot periodically of me doing the show, and then also I'm going to switch in the Zoom in and out. So we might be doing the show and then also have some different shots that come in, so you're not always seeing the straight on. But so yeah, I'm pretty excited, about getting the Zoom H4n. I do love podcasting. This is episode number 52. So I just don't have a good way to do a portable recording. So this is going to change all of that. So yeah, anyway, so like I said, the Christmas deer are out, the rope light is out. We are in good shape. And we are approaching December, and we're not supposed to have snow for like 2 weeks. We're not supposed to have snow for at least 2 weeks. And I have a pretty good break over Christmas vacation. I do some other things, but, as far as like driving to work, I have a break off from that. So that's nice because I don't have to drive in snow, but it's really weird. My daughters, we have a sledding hill out back. Literally, we just walk through our backyard about 80 feet, and then we hit the sledding hill. It's on city land. It's really nice. But that's getting to be shorter and shorter every year. You kind of get a couple snows and you got to take advantage of it. So, maybe January and February, and that's going to be it. So it is changing. I mean, and I guess I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say that I miss the snow because I don't. But it is something where, I do hope we do have a few snowfalls, at least get my daughters out there and have some sledding opportunities, at least while they're still young. So, but for me, running at night, it is so much nicer to be out when there isn't snow. Like when there's snow, I've got to put special cleats on the bottom of my shoes so I have traction and things like that. So it's just much, much nicer right now. So anyway, today's show is titled School Trip to D.C. Canceled Over Fears of Mass Shooting. This is coming from NPR.org by Lulu Garcia-Navarro. Okay, so she was a host, and she interviewed the Superintendent Jim Powell of the North Ridgeville City School District. So we will get into that in just a moment.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
And welcome back to the Safety Doc Podcast with your host, David Perrodin, a PhD out at UW-Madison, Wisconsin, home right now of your 12-0 Wisconsin Badgers football team. So exciting times. Whatever happens, it's been a tremendous season, but boy, it would be awesome to be national champions. It's actually not too far from where I live. So let's talk about this article. This is a perfect example where rhetoric derails an awesome opportunity for kids and adults. And there's two examples that are pointed out in this article. So I feel really bad. I went through this and let me just get into it. So basically, there were kids from a community about 22 miles outside of Cleveland, Ohio, 8th graders, and they were going to take a field trip to Washington, D.C. Parents decided, hey, we don't want this to happen. Washington, D.C. is a terrorist threat target, and also with the shootings and just the safety of the country and whatever, we don't want this to happen, so it's not going to happen. So I'm like, like listening to this thing, this is just bad. So I'm going to get into my first reactions on this, and then I'm going to go into the actual transcription between Lulu Garcia-Navarro and the Superintendent Jim Paul. And I do have to say, I respect the Superintendent Jim Paul and his responses in his interview with Lulu Garcia-Navarro. And I think it does post very clearly where rhetoric just goes wild in hysteria and overtakes opportunities which really kids should be afforded, especially in America. But anyway, so this whole thing is canceled because, well, first of all, they live 22 miles outside of Cleveland, but I guess I'll get into that in a second. So the parents were saying collectively, hey, a mass shooting is possible, but my perspective is, and I've had friends who have gone to D.C. in the last year, and they say D.C. is clean. There's a heavy police presence. If you're out during the day, especially during, kind of on the Monument Row, you feel very, very safe. But here's the thing, actually there's a handful of cities that are targets for a strategic nuclear detonation. You can look this up on YouTube, and there are a few people that present on this, such as like a suitcase bomb. A few cities like New York, one would be Washington, Los Angeles, maybe Atlanta, a couple others, but, just a handful of cities who would, if there was a strategic nuclear detonation. Now, when we talk about that, that's not like an ICBM being launched from somewhere. This is a nuclear bomb which has been brought to the site and detonated. There were a number of suitcase-sized nuclear bombs, produced in the 1980s, and I believe even 1990s. A number of them have been missing, specifically from the Soviet Union. So that's bad news. But I'm going to raise this arm up. But yeah, there's been talk of, what would happen if there was a detonation. So, we don't hear about this, but it's a big concern. And there are not drills that happen in these cities. City safety managers, city safety coordinators are like, we don't know how to drill for this. If it happened, it's going to happen so quickly. We're not going to have time to get people to safety. But there should be more discussion about what if something like this does happen, because it is going to be very disruptive and very destructive in maybe a 2, 3, 4 block area, and then of course the cloud of radiation where that would move and radioactive fallout. But outside of the area, you'd have a pretty high rate of survival. But anyway, this is really the big concern. But this isn't what was driving the concern of the parents who canceled this. So, and what would happen from something like this? We think of 9/11 and the stock market crashing after that, just people's trust and run on gas stations. Well, you have something like this happen. Wow, you're going to have that multiplied by 10. It's very real, but it's one of those things that's always going to be there every day that we live. So the thing is, do we cancel trips? Do we cancel our own travel because of things like this? And what message does this send to students when we say, we're not wanting you to go to our nation's capital because we don't feel it's safe? And wow, I mean, and is this school sending students abroad for semesters, and how do they feel about that? But wow, I mean, this whole thing, what message does this send to students? We can't travel in the continental United States because we don't feel our nation's capital, which is very secure, we don't feel we can safely travel there. By the way, we live 22 miles outside of Cleveland. And not to put a knock on Cleveland, and I do not want to compare city to city, because I've talked numerous times in the identification with schools that the school is the unit of study. Like, you don't compare school A to school district B to school district C in another state and things like that. So I'm not going to do that, but I am going to say Cleveland itself, in doing a lot of research in Cleveland, does represent with crime and concern in that area. So you do have students here who live 22 miles outside of Cleveland, might be going to Cleveland for shopping, for sporting events, for, visiting people, whatever. So, it's just like, like you have this right here, which your students are exposed to, which probably isn't a lot different than Washington, D.C., outside of like Washington, D.C. being targeted for possibly, like a large terror attack. But I don't know. Yeah, I was really sad. I was just really sad, flat out sad by this. So let's go to the original transcript here, posted by NPR. So this was on November 20th, 2017. And I will share out a link to this. So it's actually done as an interview format. I'm going to go through some of this to give you some context. So Lulu Garcia-Navarro was the host, and then she was interviewing Jim Powell. Jim Powell is the superintendent of the school district, Northridge City School District. And I want you to hear the exchange between the two. I'm not going to go through probably everything here, although it's not very long. But I want to point out some very specific things that stand out to me. So one is, the Lulu Garcia-Navarro from NPR asked, an 8th grade class trip to Washington, D.C. can often be a highlight of a grade school. See the White House, meet your member of Congress, but students from North Ridgeville City School District outside of Cleveland, Ohio, were notified recently their D.C. trip was canceled. Administrators called it off because of fears of a terrorist attack or a mass shooting. Okay, so now let's first just put this in context. November 20th, 2017. So within the last 2 months, not even 2 months, we had the Vegas shooting, and then we also had the Sutherland Springs shooting. So those things are very, and plus somebody running, was it in, I forget if it was Washington or if it was New York or where it was, somebody ran a vehicle up onto a running bike, pathway and had killed some people. So all of these things that happened in a short amount of time. So Superintendent Paul, Garcia-Navarro from NPR asked, so this must have been a tough call to cancel this. Must have been a tough call. And Superintendent said, yeah, very tough call. Okay. Navarro from NPR, can you give us a sense of why you decided to make it? The superintendent responds, well, start of school year, we had parent meetings, and we had several parents express concerns about the safety of the trip. It's an 8-hour trip sending kids away from their homes. That's huge. Well, but 8 hours by bus, I don't know. People are going away from home. People are going on other trips. What if people are going to Macy's to perform in the Macy's Day Parade, or going down to Florida or to perform in a Disney parade or something like that? I don't know. I don't really get that. So anyway, so the NPR reporter asked, is this unusual though? I imagine that these class trips take place every year. Why are so many parents deciding that their kids shouldn't go? And the superintendent responds, the other issue that has come up, the incident in Manhattan. Okay, so there it was, where the person drove up on the walking trail. I'm going to stop you right there. The other issue that came up, the incident in Manhattan where the person drove up on the Rhetoric, on the walking trail. This is Rhetoric. Okay, this is rare that this happened, and you are now transposing this of saying this event which happened in Manhattan is likely to happen in Washington, D.C., so we're not going to send our kids there. We're not going to have them walking around and somebody, run over them with cars. So it's this media rhetoric which has taken place. It's infiltrated the minds of parents of saying, you know what, these people are on walking trails. Nobody's safe anywhere. Okay, this is going to be interesting going a little bit later into this. So the reporter from NPR says, down near the World Trade Center, and the superintendent says, as students walk in Washington, they walk along the road, and there's nothing keeping them from the traffic, so our teachers were concerned about that. That's not true. There are several barriers. Washington is actually very well defend it against vehicle attacks, and it's also very, very heavily policed and has a strong security presence through proactive visual security system surveillance. So Washington is actually very, very safe. And just think of like Monument Mall and going to see, going to see that. There's a very, very high police presence. So that doesn't hold water to me at all of saying your students are going to walk. Your students aren't walking down the road, man. In Washington, they're walking along designated walk areas. There are, curb, the things where it's harder to use a vehicle to go and cause mass harm to people. And then this could happen anywhere, so again, this to me, now the superintendent is being very direct in what he was being told, what he was being informed. And I appreciate him for that. So I'm not trying at all to grill the superintendent Powell in this, but Garcia-Navarro from NPR asks, may I ask you, sir, is this the first time that you've ever had to cancel a trip like this because of these fears? And the superintendent Powell responds, it is not. When I was not a superintendent, I was actually the assistant superintendent. I was in a different district at that time. So, I'm reading this as it's transcribed. But yes, a lot of districts canceled trips for students back when 9/11 occurred. Okay. Why did they do that? It's the rhetoric. It was the fear that we're going to have another attack. And then also, like, how do we get our students home if anything like this happened? So, but the fact was we had heightened security. 9/11 was an isolated event. It was horribly tragic, but it was an isolated event. And canceling these trips following 9/11, and for how long that happened, it's really hard to say. But this is where the rhetoric comes into play, making you feel unsafe, and that just wasn't the case. And if you were in New York that day and you were not in the Twin Towers, you were largely safe from these events. Traumatized, very possibly, but you were safe from these events. So Garcia-Navarro from NPR responds, we've seen incidents can occur just about anywhere, whether in a small town or in a big city. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Okay. So the NPR reporter jumps in, and so far they've talked about Manhattan, and they're talking about, Washington, D.C. But so the NPR reporter says, we've seen incidents can occur just about anywhere, whether in a small town or a big city. Small town, Sutherland Springs. Okay, small town, Sutherland Springs, or a big city. Okay, and Garcia-Navarro goes on. And they're just not about terrorism. In California, just this past week, a shooter got into a kindergarten, and what saved the kids was that they had a protocol, they had a lockdown to have these protocols in place at your school. Okay, so like right here, I am just completely baffled of how the NPR reporter goes from talking about this trip to suddenly focusing it on what's the school safety in your individual school. Like, that completely turns the table on the superintendent. It was not a fair question to ask. It was more of an obvious rhetorical question to ask. And so the superintendent responds, well, we certainly do. Yes. And Garcia-Navarro from NPR responds, is there a sense, though, that this really could happen anywhere? And the superintendent, Powell, responds, I certainly have that sense, and I worry about it all the time. It's a little easier to control if they're in their home, where they're typically at, whether that be the school or whether their home environment, but you're exactly right. Okay. And then Garcia-Navarro from NPR responds, were you surprised that this should come up now? I mean, is the world so different today than it was a year or 2 years ago? Okay, now that doesn't really make sense to me, because they're already talking about, like, a year, 2 years ago, but he mentioned earlier that after September 11th, he experienced a lot of schools canceling trips. So, he's talking 16 years ago. So this is really a bizarre question for the reporter to ask. Is the world a lot different than it was a year or two ago? But anyway, do people feel that they need to hold on to their kids and keep them safe? So the superintendent responds, and I really like this. He responds, "I'm not judging anyone. And if they feel that way, they feel that way. It's surprising to me. I've gone to Washington, D.C., and I've taken all my kids. So I think they feel like this is my responsibility as a parent. I'll do it. At least I know my kids are safe. And it's not falling on the responsibility of people that are not their parents. So if that's their choice, I totally understand that." So, whoa, okay. So the superintendent comes out right here, and he says, "You know what? I've taken my kids to D.C. Like just recently, we've gone to D.C. Sees the value in Washington, D.C., and is saying, yeah, I'm surprised. I'm surprised they came to this conclusion. Does a nice job, though, of not undermining the decision of the parents, and I'm sure that there was a lot of debate probably went into this. But again, the parents are so convinced with the rhetoric. And once people get convinced with the rhetoric, it's impossible to change their mind. They will double down. You can show them the facts of saying, you know what, your likelihood of being, having anything happen to you on Washington right now versus 5 years ago or any other place is null. And they'd be like, well, we're doubling down because we just had this Vegas thing and whatever. It's like, well, you're not going to, a dance performance to 20,000 people at night. You're out during daylight. You're with a group, which increases, your safety. You're in a high prevalence police area. You know where you're going to be. You can choose the areas that you're going to stay, which are deemed safer. So it's really tough, especially when the superintendent comes out and says, I've taken my own kids there. So I just want to reflect on this. This bothers me substantially. This bothers me because this is one example where 8th graders were denied an opportunity to go to their country's capital to see the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, just to be there. Excuse me. I had friends who went there this past summer, and just one thing they told me right away is, well, the city's really clean, and we saw like a police presence, definitely, and we really, really loved the monuments and the history, and we felt very safe. There were a lot of things to do, and it's not like school groups don't go there all the time. And you could have worked on this to set up ahead of time that you meet with a school that's there, or you have a chaperone from the area who takes you around or something like that. But again, I'm reading this. It's not the superintendent's fault. The superintendent does, what he or she is directed to do by the school board and, by the parent groups. And this was the decision, made by the parent groups. And there was no changing their opinion. And especially when the rhetoric happens of, the context. This is what I call this projected benchmarking. And I talked about this a few podcasts ago, but you have like the Vegas shooter who, attacks at night from an elevated position, and then Sutherland Springs, which was more probably a domestic issue, leading into that. But people then transpose this, and they're like, and this could happen here. And what if it happens in Washington? And now, we have some friction with North Korea. So, Washington could be a target and all of this. You can go endlessly down this. But at the same time, are you not, you're denying your students of this wonderful experience. And now you also have Cleveland 22 miles away. So I went through and did a number of reviews of Cleveland for violent crime and just safety and things like that. And found, Cleveland's a difficult place to navigate in a lot of aspects. So in a certain way, are you telling your students, by the way, 22 miles away, Cleveland isn't very safe. So, are we still going to do things in Cleveland? And if so, how are we going to manage that when we've also said we're not going to Washington, D.C.? So it's uneasy, but I just think this was a hugely wrong decision. And now these kids go through with the fear. And I talked about this with Aaron Clary on an interview. Aaron Clary, Captain Capitalism, CaptainCapitalism.blogspot.com, but has written several books. One is Reconnaissance Man. But Reconnaissance Man talks about being 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, getting out and getting across the country, if not the world, and learning of the different places that are out there, and then doing a follow-up on that of places you thought, I'm really interested in here, like possibly for living or working or something like that, not just being like raised and being told like the world is a place that is unsafe and you can't traverse and you can't formulate these opinions based upon your own experiences. So this type of thing that goes on of saying we're not going to Washington, D.C., even as a group, we're not going to the nation's capital because of the threat of terrorism and, active shooter. It really changes anybody's likelihood to be a reconnaissance student, be a reconnaissance person. It makes you think twice about that when your adults are already telling you, oh, it's not safe to go here or go here. It really goes against what Aaron states in his book. I side with Aaron. I agree with what Aaron says in his book and his approach to reconnaissance. And unfortunately, we have an instance here, and I'm sure this happens more often than not right now, where we have 8th graders denied an opportunity of a lifetime and a perspective to see, some of these kids might not have ever been out of, where was it here? Northridge City. They might have never really left their city, and you could have taken them and given some exposure to, the East Coast, to where, the founding of democracy for America and just exposure. I remember, I went to Boston, back in 1997. I went to Boston with my good friend Jeff. And he won tickets actually to a Packers Patriots game, and it was the Super Bowl rematch. It was at Gillette Stadium. Interesting, but we walked Boston. A few things struck me about Boston. One is during the day, like people were very formal, like it was back then. So it was I said 97. Dress shoes, more formally dressed. We felt very confident being in Boston. People were very friendly. It was an experience I felt helped me grow a lot. We stayed out in Boston at night. We kind of knew where we were going. And we did, of course, we went to the game. It was funny because, we sat in an all Patriots section, but the people were very nice to us. After a while, we took our cheese heads off because, that wasn't... you don't want to draw that much attention to yourself, but people are very nice to us. Like we have people around us who are very nice to us, and it was a wonderful experience from the airport. We never had anybody be angry toward us. We found it very cordial. But it was one of those things. And again, this is pre, I guess, what the modern terrorist attack time would be, but we could have easily, I could have easily said, I'm not going to do it because, there's been terrorist attacks out on the East Coast. The World Trade Center had its first, terror attack, in the basement level, and just say, I'm not going to do it. I just don't feel safe. It's out of my comfort zone. But I didn't. And I'm so glad that I did that experience and I was out there. And also flying, because this whole thing too of, security in airports was really ramping up back then. starting to go through all of your bags and your luggage and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I just think the rhetoric won in this case. I appreciate the superintendent. His name was Jim Paul. He was very level, and I like how he brought in kind of that last part of saying, I went there with my kids, and if I felt it was a beneficial experience, DC, but not also going against, what his parents and supporting his parents. But it's just sad. It's just sad for me that this is where we're at right now. And that these type of decisions are being made, because we will never eradicate the chance of risk anywhere. I mean, think of the London bombings, where double-decker buses would be bombed, or Japan had the toxic chemicals released in the subways years ago. And just these types of things can happen anywhere. They're highly unfortunate, but, again, I mean, if we are I would feel fully confident going to Washington, D.C. as in a group during a day, especially if I had some kind of tour guide with me. I would feel confident with that. And if we can't feel confident going to our nation's capital and going to where the monuments are, I think that is such a shame. It is such a shame. I don't know. It really strikes me, folks. It really does. So I'm going to close here by, again, giving a thank you out to John Grant and the 405 Media for airing the Safety Doc podcast, 2 p.m. PST. And again, you are going to see everything in back of you. And the signage is pretty cool, isn't it, folks? But that's going to all be moved around, and I'm going to be doing that here, I think, probably tomorrow. And a thank you to Sprigeo, Sprigeo, for sponsoring this show, Sprigeo.com out of California, the nation's leader in school bullying and threat assessment that's going into the Sprigeo dashboard, the input system, having much success with that. And also a shout out to Captain Capitalism, Aaron Clary, it has the Clary podcast, 3 o'clock p.m. PST on the 405media.com. Rally Random with Larry Roberts on the weekends on the 405 Media. It's the 405 Media is a group of extraordinary podcasters. You can go in and get a real smorgasbord of podcasts. So your podcast thirst can be met through the 405 Media. And a thank you out to the Sustainable Living podcast with Marianne West. Again, the podcasts that are kind of my go-tos right now. And the Black Brigade, mostly if you go in, I think DT, I don't know if it used to be DT and the Man, but it's weird because there are very few followers, and it's an excellent, very intellectual, engaging podcast. Most of his stuff, I think, right now is on YouTube, so you'd have to go into search the Black Brigade on YouTube. I could be wrong with this. I've just kind of started to follow him, but I really like his stuff too. So, again, for those of you, I'm putting together my Christmas shopping list here with my daughters and getting a head start on that. Looking forward to the Zoom mic coming in, and hopefully I can figure that out. But it is going to give me an opportunity to do a lot more things in the field and a lot more field interviews, which I want to do. I wish I would have had it back when I interviewed Preston Rice and we did all of these stuff about the drones. That would have really been a help to the audio in that. So again, thank you so much. You are not the typical audience. You're intellectual, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate the followership. Go in at safetyphd.com to learn more about the show. I do post a blog along with every show. So thank you so much. And hey, share it with your friends. And let's get more followers. I'm up almost about 1,600. I was at 300 in Disney in March. I remember how excited I was. I was like, yeah, 300. Now almost 1,600. So please go and follow the show. Thank you very much. Stay safe, everybody.